Thanks very much. Today is Ukrainian Independence Day, which was obviously carefully planned by Mark to coincide with the Beyond Borders Festival. It's building, in a way, on the conversations that we had yesterday about a situation in northern Iraq, which is happening right now. This is a situation in Europe, which is happening right now. I used to be a contemporary historian, a professor of contemporary history, and we had witness seminars. And historians of the 17th and 18th century would always say that wasn't proper history. You know, interviewing people, oral history, it was all very bogus. So I used to say to them, well, if you could have half an hour with Napoleon, you'd give your right arm to ask him all the questions you ever wanted to ask him. Well, we have 4 Napoleons here, one of whom is even wearing Napoleon's coat.
Well, I didn't know that Napoleon was Swiss.
Europe would have been a much better place if he had been Swiss. All of whom played roles in the Maidan Revolution, all of whom are playing roles now in what we hope will be a peaceful Ukraine in the future when the fighting ends. And each of them are going to tell a story from the barricades. We're then going to go to a video recorded in Donetsk. Another person who was going to be with us today but felt she couldn't leave the humanitarian work that she was doing. We'll then return to our panel for a word about the future of Ukraine, and then we'll open up for discussions. So I'm going to ask Napoleon Ostap to begin the session.
Hello, honored audience. When the whole process started, I was in the position of an international secretary of a small pro-Euro integration initiative called Euro Advance. And this was a hard time which gave us a small glimpse of hope since President of Ukraine, Mr. Yanukovych, started negotiations with the EU regarding the signing of the EU-Ukraine Association Treaty. But the atmosphere in the country was completely suffocating. It felt like we are living with this, definitely in some way, tribal government full of people descending from the single city, single area, with their single culture with certain touch of criminal culture, and many people of my background were getting ready for immigration. At the very day of the 21st of November, the Ukraine's Prime Minister, Mr. Azarov, publicly stated that the process of Ukraine's Euro integration is stopped, not cancelled, but stopped. And this was the 9th anniversary of the beginning of the Orange Revolution. So, very well-known investigative journalist and blogger of the Afghani background, Mustafa Nayem, wrote a post on Facebook. He said, okay, so everybody's saying we are going to protest in some way. And like is not enough. Write that I will go. When there will be more than 500 of posts, of replies under my post, I will go. I will come there myself. I think in midday there were around 800, and in the evening it was more than 1,500. I came there at 9 p.m. and there were already hundreds of people, although it was cold and soon it started raining. This was a strange protest which started at 9 p.m. But by midnight there were several thousands of people, so subway got closed, but people didn't go away. That's how the whole Euro revolution started. It started raining, but people still stayed, although many of them didn't have umbrellas. It was forbidden by the government to put tents, so it took the people to stand there for more than a week without any cover, although it was raining often. And then the story with police attacking students at Maidan erupted, but it's another page of the story.
Thank you, Ostap. Andrei.
Well, I
Sorry,
think
sorry, Hannah.
Yeah, because we decided a little bit
Sorry, yeah,
in the
in order.
chronological. You know, really, when yesterday we started to think like what stories to tell you, it is still so fresh, and it is these 6 months is like 6 years. So you see the pictures, the different patches, and you can't choose what is the real, what is really important, what can be really interesting, because for you every moment is quite touchy. And I'm not from Kiev, I'm from the south, that's 500 kilometers from Kiev. And I want to tell just two very small stories, but which show that barricades, it's not always the barricades in the direct meaning of this word, that during such events that happened and still happening in Ukraine, you can do and you can join in a different ways, and you have your own barricades for this. My city is presumed as quite a pro-Russian, and I don't know, in some way people are thinking that if you're a multinational city, you should be pro-Russian in Ukraine. So for me, Maidan started on the 24th of November, the same as it started in Kiev, with a very small demonstration in the extreme foggy weather for the sunny resort. So you can imagine it was even more difficult to come for people. But then it was 1 month of something happening there in the capital. And then it was something like 3 days before the New Year, when the events were, it was already tense, there were more and more people coming to the central square in Kiev and all events happening there. And I knew that I'm leaving the country for 4 months. And I felt as something is, I don't know, pushing me. I can't stay for the New Year party in my town. My parents saw it and they said, okay, we don't care. Tomorrow morning we're sitting in the car because my mom's family is in the Kiev. Let's go there. Do wherever you want. And I realized that suddenly, next morning, it was something like 8 p.m. when we decided. Next morning, 30th or 31st, it was even, of December, we're driving to Kiev. And I realized that I would like to be with my friends there. Before I was there, I was on the business trips in Kiev, so I saw how it's happening. And it was a little bit messy when you're just coming and going. And suddenly there is New Year night. And I understand that starting from the 11 p.m., more and more people are coming. And people are happy, and they are coming as for some festival, and they are taking flags, and they are taking no alcohol, and people are still happy, and they are going for the biggest holiday. And then it is exactly midnight, and we used, back from the Soviet Union time, that at the 5 minutes before the midnight, it should be president telling the big speech for the country. Suddenly there is no president. There is just ordinary people telling something about the New Year. And exactly at the midnight, something around 300,000 people are singing the national anthem. And you understand that all these people really believe in what they're singing, because the words of the national anthem became even more symbolic after all those years, because there is something, if to be sure, that the time of our people and our country will come, that we will survive, our enemies will go out, and we will rule on our land. And every word of the anthem, there's just 8 lines of the anthem, all of them were like, I don't know, like a fireworks for the people and for those emotions there. And there the New Year night, you would never believe how the situation can change, because you understood that all people standing there, they pushed their own barricades, because they came there, they really felt what is going on, and it would be impossible to push these people back to the situation even 1 month ago. And the second story came for us when we realized that it was already maybe mid of January, when the crazy Russian propaganda started really work against everything happening in Maidan. And not all of us could be physically at Maidan because of different reasons. We were either working abroad as me or just different cities. And we created a small group of the experts, mostly political or economic or security experts, and raised all our contacts in the media around, especially Russian-speaking media, because English-speaking or French-speaking media were more interested in the real story. And we realized that every week we were writing around 3 interviews for different media, forgetting about all our regular work, spending time just trying to explain what is going on. For us, it was probably our barricades. It was not physically being there, but trying to help as much as possible and to find our weapons. And in our case, it was only words. But we always hope that with every new interview, with every new article that we will publish, we will be able to explain at least a little bit of what is really going on and to break those stereotypes that were created about our country and people.
Thank you, Anna. Andrei.
The first line of our anthem, which Anna mentioned, says, "We will sacrifice our souls and our bodies for our freedom." So my most emotional memories go to the very final hours of Maidan. Those were the most tragic days when the police and the snipers started shooting, which killed around 100 of our brothers and sisters. And there was this one specific episode when we had to evacuate our field hospital into a cathedral, which was 1 block away from the Maidan. And when I was at this hospital, I was approached by a man who said, "Is your phone good enough? We need to take pictures. We've got some first dead people here." And they needed the pictures to identify the dead. And when I agreed, we saw 4 bodies, and this man started taking away one body. "What are you doing?" I asked him, and he says, "There is no need to identify this person, because I know who that is. It's my father." And he says, "My wife is pregnant at home, and I want to make sure, I have not told her yet, so I want to make sure that she doesn't see these pictures before I talk to her." So he takes away this body, and then he goes back. We start doing this very routine job, and it's a terrible picture. The faces, blood. You see one arm which is separated from the body. And we did not know that this would become a routine procedure for us to identify dead people. And it's a terrible thing, because you check the pockets. If you're lucky enough to find an ID, you would cut clothes, and you would write down with a flip chart marker the name of this person. Or if you don't find an ID, you would probably find a railway ticket, or you would find a phone. You would scroll contacts. You would not call mama, or you would not call darling. You would call a random friend, and you would say, "If you know whose phone this is, please come to Maidan, because your friend is dead." So when I saw this man going back to this very routine job, I realized that the whole universe was collapsing in my head, and it would take probably many years for us to go back to normal life. So for me, Maidan, it's a huge sacrifice. And my colleagues, journalists, they said never in their lives they saw people who would be running against Kalashnikovs and snipers' rifles being protected only by constructors' helmets or wooden shields. And the reason for that is because we had never seen that kind of violence or shooting on our streets since World War II. So I think, in general, it's a huge sacrifice. And the key question for me, what actually those people were driven by? I think it's not just about the European integration, it's about dignity. And we can have a lot of theoretical or academic discussions on whether democracy works for all countries or not, whether it's a good thing or bad. But we should realize that there are some places in the world where people literally fight and die for their freedom, for their dignity, for the very chance for their kids and for their grandkids to live in democracy, live in freedom. And these days, Ukraine is one of those places.
Thank you, Andrew. Ina.
Well, I have to tell you this, that when the revolution started, I was not a great believer that it will end up with the president being removed. It didn't seem feasible. It didn't seem that it's going to happen. It seemed that the regime was so strong, and that the civil society was so disintegrated, and that people would never be able to fight it, particularly with weapons. That does seem still absurd that it is actually happening. But I wasn't a great believer, and I first was very skeptical about what was happening. I clearly remember the first time when I got really scared of what was happening in the streets of Kyiv was the first night, was it November 31st, when I wake up in the morning on Saturday. I read the news, and I realized that the people on Maidan have been attacked by the police. And I realized that my students were there, and I started just emailing and posting Facebook posts saying like, "Hey, have you been there? Are you alive? Are you okay?" Because that was the first time I was scared. but it still didn't feel like it can remove this whole machine that was just running the country. And my personal close involvement in Maidan started in January, when I realized that people who are attacked on the streets, they're taken to the hospitals. They're taken to the hospitals, and then from the hospitals, they're just kidnapped by the police or by unknown people, and nobody is known where they disappear after that. And there have been a meeting in my university, and the students say, we got to do something about that. I mean, we can't fight. We are too, you know how students look like. They're not too strong to fight. They don't have weapons. They don't have necessary skills or whatever. But we can protect people who are in the hospitals, at least. So we started very suddenly a hospital guard program. We were running it for almost 2 months. And it started as a way to protect people in the hospitals, because it did seem cruel to take away from the hospitals people who were, they had their hands cut, or, they were severely injured, and taking them to the police, to the detention centers or whatever. So we started this hospital guard program, and because of that, people started contacting us. And I was just amazed with how many people would call you and say, we have food for those injured in the hospitals. We have money. Can we give money to somebody or whatever? And it's just amazing. It was a 24/7 program. At some moment, I realized that I received a phone call at 2 in the morning from a person running Amnesty International in Ukraine. And she's calling me and say, hey, I just wanted to say hello and wanted to introduce myself. I think we should keep in touch. And I was, yeah, okay. And we discussed some things, and I hung up. And my husband says, who was that? I was like, the lady from the Amnesty International, just calling to establish contact at 2 in the morning. And that seemed pretty okay at the time, because this was something that was going on 24/7 for several months. So you can feel how much pressure was in there, how much sacrifice was in that, and particularly because you don't have the break from that. You do that all the time. You are always in that. And then when the terrible events of February 20th happened, when the snipers started shooting at people on the streets, that is, of course, when everybody got... at that time I couldn't cry anymore, but that was really, really emotional and really difficult. And at that time, again, it felt like nothing can be done. If they're shooting with snipers, they're shooting at people on the street, what can we do against that? And then a few days after that, my husband's parents came to visit to Kiev. They went to the Barricades. They stayed with us for a few days. And because I was running the hospital guard program, they said, hey, some people from our town, and they live in a small town in western Ukraine. Some people from our town, they collected some money for those injured in the hospital and asked us to give you the money so that you can get the money to the injured in the hospital. And at that time, we had so much money for the injured in the hospitals that we didn't really need that money. So I decided to transfer some of the money to the families of those victims who were shot on Maidan on February 20th. So I go to the bank and I open up the envelope. I haven't opened it before. It was just an envelope. And I know that it's an envelope with the money that was collected by teachers in 3 schools, and one of them is the orphanage school, and by the kids from those schools. And it's a small, depressing area in western Ukraine, so people are really poor there, and teachers in the schools are really underpaid, and particularly in the orphanage, it's a really difficult social situation. So I open up the envelope, I take out the money, I stand there in the bank. I still can't tell the story without crying, but I take out the money and I realize that those are really small money, like 1 hryvnia each. And it's not that people took out a lot, big money, like 50 hryvnias or whatever, but those were just as much as they could give. It was really what is the matter for them, that they give something. And the kids would give their lunch money, just several hryvnias, just to help people standing there and fighting for something that was really important for all of them.
Thank you. Thank you. And if anybody has not seen the film that's running in the yurt, thank you, behind us, which recounts the events of the 20th, then I'd urge you all to see it. The situation in Ukraine is still critical, and the anti-terrorism operation is still going on. Another one of our colleagues who was going to join us today decided in the end, as I said, that she couldn't leave the humanitarian work that she was doing, but she sent this message.
That's the great honor for me to talk to you. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you, and I'm so sorry to miss such an important event and not to meet my friends with whom normally I share my happiness and my sadness. But now I'm coming back to Donbass because I'm a regional member of parliament, and as my teacher Brian Durati told me, that politicians should be responsible not only for thoughts but for efforts and for everything. Being a citizen of Donbass, being a regional member of parliament, I'm coming back because there are some people from my constituency who are suffering now. It's very clear that it is the humanitarian catastrophe in Donbass. I'm so sorry to say that 3 million of civilian people who are there now looks like they don't looks like those people who do not take in their hands any arms. They don't need neither by Ukrainian government, nor by anybody else. The people who are sitting now in Edinburgh, those who are going to discuss the geopolitical stuff, please pay attention on the fact that those who are living in Donbass, more than 3 million people, do not want any war. We just want peace. And we would like international communities, the most influential politicians from every country, to explain to all stakeholders that civilians should not be punished for any political mistakes, whether they were done by politicians in the past or would be done in the future. Civilians, their children, the pregnant woman and disabled children are not guilty. What we do believe in, we are impartial. Who we are the group of volunteers, responsible citizens. We are impartial only because the main mission of us to help those disabled, pregnant and old people who are staying in the middle of the war. And it is a war. It is not the anti-terroristic operation. It is a war. Thank you very much for the attention. So sorry that I cannot be with you now. And it is huge privilege for me to be invited on such a great event. Thank you. Bye.
So let's. Oh. Sorry. Let's move from the events of the revolution to the events now, and I'm going to ask to go through our panel again and to comment a little bit about what's happening now and how you see the future of Ukraine, and we'll do it in the same order. So, Ostap.
So, if you'd compare what's going on with Ukraine to some natural diseases, I'd say that we have a fire, a flooding, and a need for a major repair at the same time. So we've got war. Russia's attacking Ukraine right now. We've got unfinished revolution. Those who committed crimes are still not fully punished. And we've got a desperate need for reforms. And all those things are to be handled simultaneously.
Thank you, Ostap. Hannah.
You know, I always joking that in this situation, as an analyst, and I always thought that I'm specialist in the conflicts resolution by the background, but as an analyst, unfortunately, I see the worst. As a citizen, I would like to believe in the best. And you really need to find a balance between two of you. The situation is really quite dangerous now. And it's dangerous, first of all, because we really can't expect how it will finish. We can only hope for the variant that we would like to see. But for me, it is much more important, not even the tanks which are now there, or the some rocket systems, but what to do after this. Okay, even if we sign some ceasefire, if we throw away the people, what to do there? And it's not only the reforms of physical reconstruction of those buildings that are now blown up. All this important, but all this physical. But unfortunately, there are those 3 million of people. Not all of them understand what is happening. Not all of them still understand what's happened at Maidan and why people were there. There are people full of stereotypes and myths that were cultivated there for years by the Russian media that prevailed there over Ukrainian media. And there are families they are still divided in the eastern Ukraine. My parents from eastern Ukraine, so I know the situation there pretty well, that they support different sides. There are still plenty of people who think that Russian army should come to the eastern Ukraine. And for me, it is much more important to understand what we can do to reconcile, what we can do to break these stereotypes and myths exist there, and to show that being pro-Ukrainian or pro-independent Ukraine doesn't mean to be extreme fascist nationalist. Because the funniest for me was when people were saying, all those at Maidan are fascist. I said, okay, so 20% of population of my city who are of the Jewish region and who are really supporting, all Jewish organizations supported Maidan. So you can imagine Jewish organizations supporting any fascist regimes? It's just nonsense. The same when other ethnic minorities of Ukraine supported really the revolution and all events. So that is the main, probably now, I think that the most important to raise the questions, to be frank with raising the questions for yourself. What is next? How to reconcile, how to explain what we can do, not only to write a new legislation, because we know you can write but never implement, not only to rebuild the schools, but how to rebuild the lives of the people and of the country.
Thanks. I mean, that seems to be the critical question, Andrew. How can you get to reconciliation?
I think that the events in the East, it's the continuation of the Maidan. Both there and in the East, we are fighting for our freedom and for the very right of our nation to choose its own destiny. Once again, we are not just running away from Russia. I think we are saying goodbye to the Soviet Union and to the communist heritage and all the terrible things which go along with that. And we have Grigory Nemiria in the audience. He is my fellow colleague from the parliament and one of the most prominent constructors of our European integration. And he would probably call you dozens of pragmatic reasons for Ukraine to join the European Union and to be part of that family. And I know it's a tricky thing to talk about the European Union in the country which is considering leaving the Union. But for people in our country, all this about very basic things. It's respect to human dignity, and it's the right of the people to choose their destiny. And people go to the streets not when they have nothing to lose. They go there when they have something very important stolen from them. And in November of 2013, someone was trying to steal away our future from us. So I think now we are as close as never before, actually, to taking full responsibility for our future. And I looked up recent polls from Ukraine. They say that the support for Ukraine's independence has reached historical maximum, which is well above 90%. And that's the result of the recent events. So this country, which still has the older generation, some of whom would like the Soviet Union to return, I think they have made a very important decision in their life in these recent months. So I'm very optimistic about the future of my country, and of course I'm very worried about the events which are happening today.
Thank you, Andrew. Ina.
Well, after the revolution, can we say after revolution now? No. After the new government was formed, I was invited to work in the government as the first Deputy Minister of Education and Science. Been doing the job for half a year now, and I've been talking to a friend of mine recently. I haven't worked in the government before. I was running a think tank, I was teaching in the university. I was planning on working for the government in a few years, but clearly not now. I was talking to a friend of mine who's now the first Deputy Minister of Culture, and it's the same with her. She was a curator for a private foundation. She was invited to work for the government as well. And we've been talking, and we actually came up with a metaphor of what we are doing there. It feels like we are learning to ride a bike, which is broken, and at the same time somebody is throwing stones at you. So this is so much how it feels working in the government right now. You are not sure how exactly to run it. It's broken because the whole bureaucratic machine is so much the legacy of the past. The whole bureaucratic procedures are so long and so unprepared for taking fast decisions that we really need right now. And you still have to do some reforms, and you have to fix the bicycle at the same time, while learning to ride it. And it's really difficult because people do expect reforms, because what were we fighting for if not for the reforms? We were not fighting just to take away the president, right? We were fighting to make the reforms. And then, of course, there are some people who don't want you to make the reforms. Some of them are in the government, let's be honest about that as well. There is still corruption, there is still the amazingly slow bureaucratic apparatus, which is just annoying at some points, because just last week I've been having a talk with some people from the ministry, and with a particular situation connected to the war in the East, we do have to deal with how do we start the new school year on the East, in the universities and the schools and things like that. So I've been talking to them and saying, like, okay, we can't shut down the universities, but they can't function either. So how do we do that? How do you keep the universities and at the same time, don't make students go to the classes and put them in danger? And it's extremely annoying when people working in the government would tell you that, it's not allowed according to the law. So, really? Have you seen the news? Nothing is done according to the law. We can't pretend we should do everything according to the law. But we should try, and we should also try to do the reforms, and we are very happy that the new law on higher education has been the first big reform that has been passed by the parliament. So we do try our best, but it's clearly not easy when people keep on throwing stones at you.
I want to open up to questions, but as Andrei mentioned, we have the chairman of the Committee of European Integration from the Ukrainian Parliament, Ms. Nemira, with us. And I wonder if you would like to just open the discussion part with a statement, and Agenta has a microphone for you, sir.
Thank you, Brian, and it's really symbolic that this panel is taking place in the Independence Day. And you asked Brian a question about the future, what future in front of us. And in the course of these 23 years of Ukraine's independence, it was an attempt to sell the future in two options. One, Ukraine as the country that destined to be in between, a borderland between Russia and the West, between Russia that builds its own national building project and Europe that also has its own vision. So that has an attraction in a way that it doesn't call for responsibility to choose, to stay where you are and be satisfied with that. In security sense, it means to continue to be in the gray zone. And probably one of the reasons of this violence and horrible events that happen in Ukraine, that we are paying a very high price for being in the gray zone. The other option that was tempting as well, for Ukraine to be a bridge between West and East. So too many politicians, including former President Yanukovych, their entry point, their selling point, fellow citizens, there is no need to choose. We are natural bridge between Russia, East, and West. But these events, and it's not just events of 2013-14, I think we, historically speaking, we have to start with the Orange Revolution of 2004, which defined Ukraine. Before a nation decides what it wants to become, it has to answer what it is. So the answer was that Ukraine defined itself painfully as a nation with its own identity that wants to be part of Europe in all senses of this word. So our destiny, I believe, is neither to be a forgotten borderland, nor a breach between a managed democracy, as it's called now under President Vladimir Putin, and Western democracy in all meanings of this word. So this is vision, I believe, that defines momentum, which is currently in Ukraine, and that's what the Ukrainians are fighting for. But there is another aspect that needs to be also taken seriously. And that's probably for those who are in the audience would refine the memories of the Second World War, when the other president, President Roosevelt of the United States, was trying to convince Americans that were quite willing to support America that isolated. So he was fighting this isolationist temptation. And that was happening in the time of Battle for Britain. And he used metaphoric comparison. That the British are like your neighbors, and their house is on fire. And they're asking you for a hose to borrow. And any rational person would not deny help to its neighbor whose house is on fire. So we are Ukrainians, your neighbors, and our house was put on fire, and we need your hose to fight this fire. But it's not just give us tools and we finish the job. It's not just that. Because, and some of my colleagues already mentioned, there is an arsonist who is next to your house, who put your house on fire. And he did this not because he likes it. And usually arsonists are not put in just one fire. They put another and another one. And again, they are doing this not because they like it, but for profit. There is a motivation behind this. So therefore, we need to answer a question. And it's a very important question that would define also Ukraine's future, Europe's future, all ours future. What viable Russia policy should be adopted? And to answer this question, it is important, I believe, to keep in balance two objectives. One, how to influence Russia's calculations, and how to approach Russian attitudes. And I'm saying Russians, but clearly mean the Russian leadership. Because as Andrei mentioned, by geography, we're defined as neighbors. There is a great Russian culture, which is part also of Ukrainian culture. There is many Russian and Ukrainian thinkers that work together. But we have to answer this question. And I think the right answer would lie in not in choosing linguistic divisions, not to concentrate on ethnicity as such, but to try to find what unites nations, especially in the time of the troubles. And as any sensible persons, as I think most of all of us are, we prefer at the time of great challenges to meet these great challenges as colleagues and friends, but not alone and friendless. This is something that sent message both inside Ukraine, calling for the need for the national dialogue, reconciliation, and responsible policies that would inspire people's trust rather than mistrust, would not fuel the sense of alienation, as a colleague from Donetsk just referred to, but really try to define this Ukraine's dream as dream to belonging, of belonging, not to be alone. And that would help also, this clarity would help also Russia to better understand, with time passing, that there is a very high price to pay for the dream that Russian leadership tried to sell their own people, that you can be only great nation when you subordinate your neighbors. This is very important. And in this sense, because Crimea has not been mentioned, we have to avoid temptation of acquiescence with the Russian desire to dominate at the expense, Russian leadership desire of their neighbors. And Crimea should not be recognized as part of Russia. Annexation is annexation. This year, next year, 100 years after. Theft is theft. This is an important message of clarity. But today, with this quite special occasion, I want to express my gratitude to Beyond the Borders colleagues, to Mark, and as a token of appreciation, to present this symbol of Ukraine's Euromaidan to Beyond the Borders. To Beyond the Borders, and Mark is there, he is watching.
Come on, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, sir. So we've got 5 minutes left or so. So if anyone wants to make a contribution or ask a question, please do. Sir, wait for the mic.
If you were asked to ask me or most informed people here, probably to name a Ukrainian politician, probably struggled to go further than the iconic Yulia Tymoshenko, who at one time seemed to offer some kind of beacon of hope. I believe she's understood very differently now, and I'd like to know what the panel could say about her and her current circumstance.
Andrei, do you have any views on the current circumstances of Yulia Tymoshenko?
Well, as a member of Yulia's team, I should say that we are in a very difficult process of reconstructing of our party. And of course, we are one of the oldest democratic parties in the country, and we used to be the key party opposing Yanukovych, so there is a lot of work to do. But she is as much fighter as she used to be. She is a strongly pro-European, pro-democratic leader, and I'm pretty sure we'll see her around in the next parliament and in the future. I think we have very new demands what it's like to be a politician these days. And it's not just about making good speeches, it's also about being part of a real struggle in the streets. It's about being on barricades. That's something that she knows how to do. And it's also about being able to change, to recognize mistakes, and to attract new people. So that's what we are into.
Thank you. Right at the back.
Just interested in your opinion. Realistically, is there any prospect of Crimea ever being reunited with Ukraine, being pragmatic?
Hannah, what are the prospects as an analyst of these issues of geopolitics? What are your judgments about the possibility of reunity?
In March we were naming one date. We hoped for different situations, and definitely we couldn't expect the current events in eastern Ukraine that totally took all attention from there. Some of my colleagues even told me that, come on, you can't understand, they started all this mess in Donbass just to foreigners to forget about Crimea. So for them it will be more important to find peace in Crimea, in Donbass, and everybody will forget about peaceful annexation of the Crimea. Definitely Ukrainian people and Ukrainian politicians doesn't matter which party, because that is probably the only question in which our party are in the consensus, that Crimea should be and is part of Ukraine. Also because there are so many people, not only Ukrainians, but all Crimean Tatars who are supporting being as a part of Ukraine. If to be realistic, I would give not less than 5 years for Crimea to start thinking about coming back. And that is optimistic. It's not a pessimistic. Why? Because unfortunately, at least this year and the next year, we will have this euphoria of some of the people living there. Plus the whole policy of the Russian Federation there, especially towards the Navy people and military people who are serving there. And they're ready for some suffer, because, you know, when they don't have enough of products, of tourism, of income, and so on, that is suffering. But they think that, okay, we're ready to suffer, but probably for some better future. And for me, it will be the question, if this better future is not coming, will they realize what mistakes they did? Because honestly, it's nothing about Ukrainian nationalism, but it's difficult to find, probably we're not too much attentive to the events in the Crimea, but Ukraine never were really suppressive about what is going on there. So it was really shock for most of the people, except of the specialists in the national minorities' rights probably, or OSCE, some of the specialists, that such euphoria appeared later. But also that is the question of misunderstanding, that the same is happening in eastern Ukraine now. When people can't understand what is going on in the capital, they are trying to escape the situation. And they are not searching for the answers, but they are just covering. And that's what most of the citizens of Crimea did. Definitely not 87% as the referendum showed, because it was not a referendum.
You can't trust referendums. One last question. Anybody? Elizabeth.
I wonder if the panel could tell us a little bit about the role that's being played by the Ukrainian oligarchs in the politics of what's going on, and also in the eastern region where all the fighting is happening.
Ostap, would you like to, insofar as you can, comment on that?
Yeah, so the full role of Ukrainian oligarchs in the situation is still unclear, since oligarchs control the mainstream media, and the issue of the coverage of Euromaidan in the mainstream media is also different from different media to different media. Another point is the role of oligarchs directly in the situation in the East. Now there are criminal trials opened against several Eastern oligarchs who are accused of supporting the terrorism in order not to be punished for the crimes committed during Yanukovych times. Regarding the fracking issue, well, I think this issue has been used by Russian propaganda against Ukrainian government as a part of the dispute regarding the energetic independence of Ukraine. Fracking, as any other technology in oil and gas industry, has its own environmental risks. And here there was a problem of both communicating to the community as well as the exaggerating role of Russian propaganda when fracking issue was used as one of the triggers for the disorders in the East.
Okay. I think we've almost run out of time. Do you want quickly, Andrew?
I just wanted to use this opportunity as a chance to thank Bernie Smith and the whole John Smith Memorial Trust team for running the John Smith Fellowship. All the four of us used to be here in Scotland and in this wonderful place thanks to the program. That's how we met, not just Elizabeth, but also Brian, Mark, and many other wonderful people. So please be aware that you have made a very important contribution in the fantastic changes and hopefully very good changes which will come to Ukraine. Thanks a lot.
Just let me say again that if you haven't seen the film that's running, I urge you all to see it. And one of the unintended consequences that we discussed of the events in Ukraine has been the creation, I think, of a new Ukraine, a new national identity for Ukraine. And I think we need to understand that the events that are going on in the East are happening in a European country right now. So even if we might think what's going on in northern Iraq is far away, that's our problem too. But this is happening right now in Europe. And as Ostap said, they need help and assistance So if anybody has any way of assisting Ukraine and building on this new national identity, please take today as an opportunity to think about what you could do. And I'm sure the fellows would be delighted to help put you in touch with people who you could help. Andrei.
And as Michael McFaul, the former US ambassador to Russia, wrote in New York Times, to stop Putin, support Ukraine. That's the best advice.
Thank you very much.